after conferring with the sponsor, whom I have learned to trust during the past few decades, including in our past several years of legislative work on human rights. After conferring with the sponsor, it is with deep regret that I must vote against his proposed measure amending the Human Security Act.
Matagal na po itong hinihintay ng ating kapulisan, kasundaluhan, and other state security forces.
Number 1083, an act to prevent, prohibit, and penalize terrorism, thereby repealing Republic Act Number 9372, otherwise known as the Human Security Act of 2007. Roll call vote, Honorable Senators Angara, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, De La Rosa, Drilon, Gatchalian, Go, Gordon, Hontiveros, Lacson, Lapid, Marcos, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Tolentino, Villanueva, Villar, Zubiri, Senate President Soto III.
With 20 affirmative votes, 1 negative vote, no abstention, Senate Bill 1083 is approved of third reading. Senator Hontiveros recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to explain my, with all due respect, no vote on the Human Security Act.
Then the count should be 22, 19 affirmative votes and 2 negative votes. No, when I said 1 negative vote, it was recorded as Senator Pangilinan. So
yes,
you are now
Mr.
recorded
President.
as the second negative vote. Senator Hontiveros is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I firmly believe that Congress should do all it can to ensure the safety and security of the Filipino people, particularly from acts of terror and other forms of violence. Acts of terror do more than destroy the lives of the people directly affected. They also lead to economic disruption and uncertainty, as well as an atmosphere of fear and paranoia. However, Mr. President, safety and security can never be at the expense of the fundamental freedoms guaranteed by our Constitution. While all rights permit exceptions, I fear that certain provisions of the bill, specifically those allowing the preliminary proscription of suspected terrorist organizations prior to their being given an opportunity to be heard, as well as those lowering the standard for warrantless arrest and detention, go too far and might lead to a number of pernicious consequences. As I premised in my interpellation, Mr. President, we must craft laws presuming the most despotic of implementers instead of the most benevolent of leaders. Thus, after conferring with the sponsor, whom I have learned to trust during the past few decades, including in our past several years of legislative work on human rights, after conferring with the sponsor, it is with deep regret that I must vote against his proposed measure amending the Human Security Act, a measure that I know is very important to him and that he sincerely believes will be supremely beneficial for Philippine society. I hope he understands that my convictions, as well as my faith in the fundamental freedoms enshrined in our Constitution, do not allow me to do otherwise. Marami pong salamat, Mr. President.
Senator Pangilinan is recognized.
Thank you. May I be allowed to explain my vote? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, first we thank Senator Ping Lacson for his diligence in shepherding this measure and for his patience in answering all our questions with regard to it. We recognize the hours of reading, research, and interviews that went in the crafting, sponsorship, and finally defense of the measure. However, this representation fears that the amendments to the Human Security Act right before us may be abused, as it will, among others, allow law enforcers or military personnel to place individuals and organizations under surveillance, compel telcos to divulge their calls and messages, arrest these people without warrant, and detain them for an extended period of 14 days. The measure also allows regional trial courts to outlaw an organization as terrorist at the requests of even foreign and supranational jurisdictions. It likewise removes the compensation for persons wrongfully detained. At a time when legitimate critics and democratic dissent are being attacked, the Human Security Act could be likened to a certain extent to the anti-subversion law during martial law and may be used against critics and opposition leaders. Certain questions now come to mind. Can the law be used against democratic opposition leaders? Can opposition political parties be outlawed and tagged as terrorist organizations? Some may say this is far-fetched, and most certainly some will say this is not the intent of the law. Allow me to bring us back in time during the martial law years to remind us of how the law was used to go after the democratic opposition leaders. The administration then claimed that it had declared martial law in response to the communist threat posed by the